So today I'm going to talk about design and hopefully about the intersection between design and libraries. And it's a total pleasure to be invited to speak here today. Thank you for the great introduction and the incredibly warm welcome both yesterday and this morning. I've had the privilege of having a good relationship with Uts Library for the last few years and more recently AUT Library. And so I've been involved and had some insight into some of the exhilarating changes that are happening within the library context. And as Lorinda said this morning, library services are essential services. And it's been fabulous to have the opportunity to do work with libraries and to have conversations about design with libraries. And so it's really exciting for me to now kind of be able to extend that to even greater conversations across New Zealand libraries from this morning. So thank you. So as Lorinda mentioned or didn't mention this morning, there is a lot of change and things happening within the library landscape. And what I'm hoping to share this morning is how I believe that design tools and strategies can provide ways to help navigate some of those things or think about them in different ways, and to particularly open up some of those opportunities that Lorinda mentioned in terms of exposing the great value that libraries offer and extending that contribution. I know a lot of people are already on a design journey, and you might not even be calling it that, and that's fine. And what I'm hoping to do this morning is put out a few concepts and ideas that can just be a bit of a platform or a start point for discussion. So it's not a prescriptive story, it's just hopefully to initiate more discussion over the next few days. And I know a lot of the presentations will be also looking at different aspects of things that I'm touching on, particularly in relation to collaboration. So a talk about design could be a talk about any one of these things. And these are all sort of different lingos or phrases or hot topics. Some of you might be familiar with some of them. Really, they're all talking about the same thing. They've got their own nuances, but they're all talking about a shift in how organisations think about how they provide services to their community and the people that they serve. A sort of shift to thinking in a different way about how we work. And so I'm not going to talk about any one of these specifically necessarily. I'm just going to boil it down to sort of one sentence for today, which is that design is a way to work with our community to create the future that we want and have the greatest impact. It's a big call, and I'm not suggesting that design's a silver bullet by any means, but this is just a nice way to sort of focus the discussion from my point of view in terms of the value of design. I'm using the word community instead of the word user or customer or client. And I know different people use different languages, but I find community to be a bit kinder than some of those other terms, and it's also quite all-encompassing. So your community might be professional, it might be public, it includes your staff, it might be academic researchers, so it's a nice kind of term that we can use regardless of who we're working with. What I'm going to do today is start by just unpacking a little bit what design is and providing some background for what I mean when I say design, and then look at how it's being used by organisations and how it's being used particularly by libraries that I've had the experience of working with. And then at the end, perhaps some advice actually from some of those libraries about their journey that I hope that people here will be able to build on as well. So to start with the definition, what is design? What am I talking about? Design's fundamentally about change. It's about going from where we are now to a possible future. There is a process that's associated with design, and if you Google design process, you'll get a million different versions, but at the end of the day, they're kind of all talking about the same thing, which is that we go through a process of sort of discovery, we define what the opportunity is, and then we look at ways to solve it. And I use the double diamond version from the UK Design Council because I think it expresses that sort of going wide to define, and then going wide again to come up with a creative solution in a really nice way. So the key thing here is that design isn't just a problem-solving activity. We don't just leap to what the solution is. We first spend some time unpacking the problem because that allows us to think much more creatively about what the problem actually is. I'm not going to take us on a step-by-step guide of the design process. There's a lot of materials online that do that, and I've got some links at the end of the presentation if people are interested. What I'm going to do is talk more about the qualities that underpin the design process. Some of these you may already be doing or you'll be very familiar with, and that's fantastic. So there's 4 key qualities that I'm going to talk to. The first one is that design is people-centered. What I mean by that is traditionally this is how organisations have looked at the world, from the inside out. So if your organisation is a blob, and I mean that in the most generous way, often we look at the world from the inside out, from the structure of our organisation. And what design encourages us to do is come out here and look at it from the perspective of our community and understand what's going on for them, what motivates them to engage with our service, and take this outside-in view. And the blob looks quite different from this side, right? And I know some of you will have already been experiencing a lot of this. When some of the classic examples, and I'm not picking on libraries, this is just easy examples, are around things like catalogue interfaces or signage within libraries. We know that people who are not familiar with that stuff can come, and those things might be a barrier. So design encourages us to start and look and understand from our community's point of view. It's tangible and experiential. So some of the first things that we do when we start designing are making things visual and building things and externalizing stuff. So rather than dealing with words and abstract concepts, we deal with drawings and patterns, and we make things available by externalizing them. It also means we can start to share. So once something becomes physical or visual, I can talk to someone else about it in a different way, and we can build on it together. And that's a really key part of design. It's quite different to how traditional planning processes work as well, which tend to be a very written word-based. Design is also action-based, so we make to learn. And again, prototyping, you'll hear that term a lot. And it just means building something so that you learn more about the situation that you're in. And so it's a lot like action research. It just means that we don't expect to understand all the variables that we're dealing with at the beginning and then just implement something that's finished. We'll build things and we'll learn as we go. So it's iterative cycles of doing and learning. It also means that we can build things and work out that the idea that we thought was a really good idea wasn't such a good one, and change our minds before we invest a whole lot of money in it. So things like beta in software are sort of versions of that kind of thing, where they're testing out ideas and they're continuing to change. The fourth key thing in design is that it's collaborative. So inherently doing design, you've got to bring together multiple disciplines in order to create a solution that's actually concrete and real. You know, everybody can be talking about things, but when you actually want to consolidate that into something, you've got to bring together business and all different kinds of perspectives, maybe technology, content specialists, etc. So design is often a facilitation process. What's really exciting is that design is growing up. So traditionally, design might have been associated with communication, graphics, or fashion, or products, but now we're allowed to apply design to anything we like, including social issues, organisations, policies, and services. And that's where you hear design thinking. That's kind of what that term is referring to. So it's opening up and opening out. More people can participate in it, and more people can adapt design tools into their own organisations that might traditionally not have done that. So I like to think of it as a democratization of design. So it's become available for people to use and that may have traditionally not thought of themselves as design practitioners. One of the key ways that people are using it is to involve their community in the design process. And so I'm going to just give a couple of examples of what I mean by that. Not library examples yet. So this is one organisation I did a lot of work with in Sydney, the Inspire Foundation. They're a youth mental health organisation. And they know that, so they're designing online services for young people. What they want to do is reduce suicide and increase the health and well-being of young people. And they do that through the delivery of great services, but they create great services by working with the young people that the services are for. And so they're using the design process to involve young people in those services. And this is an example from a recent project to develop an online help-seeking tool. And one of the first things we did was work with young people to map what their help-seeking journey was. When they were looking for help, what was happening, what were they feeling, where were they going, and in their own language, because young people don't talk about help-seeking, right? They don't think they're going on a help-seeking journey. They're having some kind of questioning or issue, and they're going to try and find some information about that. So we wanted to understand, what does the world look like from your point of view, and start to be able to use that as a tool for designing a service that was more meaningful. And we also worked with them to do things like, what is the future, if that's what it looks like now, what would it look like in the future? What would an ideal experience look like and feel like for you? What should be there? What should it say? What should happen? So we're using these tangible tools that I talked about to enable young people who have no design expertise, but are experts about their own experiences, to contribute to the development of new services. So the tactile nature is a really important part of it. And if young people demonstrate that something won't fly, like that they'll never use this thing or that feature, then it gets dumped. They don't waste time trying to develop stuff that they know is actually not going to be used. Another brief example from the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations, and they have a whole lot of research about how to increase HIV testing, and it's things like make HIV testing more convenient. But what on earth does convenient mean? It's different to different people. And so they did a lot of work with different groups of Australian men to understand their HIV testing experiences, mapping them over time. What was a bad experience, what made a good experience, and then working with them collaboratively to prototype what an ideal experience might look like. So these are all the different stages of a testing journey. How would the results get delivered? What would an acceptable waiting time be? And they literally physically built that and talked with the groups about what that would look like and feel like. So these organisations are using the design tools. Why? To develop services that are more relevant and meaningful for their community. And you can imagine that after I heard Lorinda's talk this morning, I was regretting my choice of words, particularly for this slide. But hopefully you'll bear with me, and it still has relevance in this context. So the design is offering these kinds of organisations a way to work and make sure that what they're delivering is actually having greater impact. When it's taken up in a business context, that usually means greater profitability. And that's when we hear a lot about customer experience. We want to make unique experiences for people so they keep coming back and building brand loyalty. And without being cynical, that's usually about making more money when you come from a business sector. When you're in the social sector or education, or places like libraries, it's about impact, right? And that might be improved health outcomes if you're a medical library, or it might be greater forms of literacy, or a more expansive uptake of te reo and other forms of literacy. So in this context, it's less about relevancy so that you make more money and more about having greater impact, the capacity to have greater impact. So that's why people are taking it up. How are they doing that? They're working together with their communities, using design tools and many other tools to understand the world of their community and the lives of their community, and where that overlaps with what the organisation has to offer and how it can deliver those services. So at that intersection is the point where you can have the greatest value. So they're using it to focus their efforts and making sure that the services that they deliver are the ones that will get them the furthest. And sometimes that means making tough decisions, right? But you've only got so much to work with. And so this is a bit of a strategic tool for making sure that the things you do choose go the furthest. And a lot of those services are being developed, from this outside thinking. They're looking quite different to how they might have traditionally been delivered because they've come from the perspective of what's going on in the lives of those people. So this idea of working with your community and getting that sort of overlap and impact, you can think about that happening. We're going to go into business strategy mode for a second. You can think about that happening on 3 levels of your organisation. The first one is on the outside. If this is I've turned the blob into a circle. If this is our organisation, we've got our services on the outside, which are our physical interaction points. So it's our websites, it's our mobile apps, it's our actual buildings and front desks and service desks, the things that people actually interact with. So you can work with a community to make sure that those are are designed in a way that are easiest for them to use, most useful. It's getting delivered in the right place at the right time through the right channels. You can also work with your community, to understand what services should you even be delivering. Do you need that particular service? Is that useful? Are enough people using it to make it worthwhile? Or are there better ways of delivering the service once you start thinking about it from the outside in? The third one is actually starting to think about what is our actual value, what is the role that we play within our community, and what is the greatest way that we can deliver on that. So you can work with your community at all 3 of those levels to be discovering those things. And a lot of the work that we see from it when we talk about user experience is often the outside circle, and that's incredibly important, but there's these other layers that we can be thinking about as well. So what about libraries? Where do libraries come into this? Of course, for libraries, all 3 levels are incredibly important, and a lot of people are doing great work on the outside and even on the middle circle. But for the top one, libraries have got so much ongoing external change. I won't say redefining, because that might have been one of the words we weren't allowed to use as well. But ongoing evolution, right? There are some really big questions. What is the value of libraries now? We know they're valuable, but how do we define them? How do we talk about them? How do we extend it? How do we make sure everybody knows there's nothing going away about libraries? So there's real opportunities, I think, for libraries to be operating at that top level just as much as the other 3 levels in terms of defining and making sure everybody knows how important their value is. So I'm just going to talk to 3 examples that come out of libraries that I've had a relationship with, or been lucky enough to work with in some way. The first one is Hurstville Public Library in Sydney, and they're refurbishing their building. So it was a bit of a trigger for them to say, you know, before we do that, we need to understand and make sure that we're making the right decisions and we're building the best future library for our community that we can. So they did some co-design work with different groups of their community, seniors, parents, students, to understand, you know, what do you need from us, what do you want from us, what should we be doing? And so one of the things that we started out with was just understanding what it meant to be Hurstville and what does it mean to be Hurstville Library. So this is an activity where you use a box as a metaphor, and you get people to put things on the outside, labels, ingredients, taglines. If Hurstville was a box, what would that box look like? So people start to tell you what they see as being important about their city. We also asked people to talk about past visits, the most recent visit, and the most frustrating visit. And from these sorts of things, we got to understand, you know, why are people coming? What are their expectations? What are they hoping to get out of it? What does it really, you know, what frustrates them? When is it an unsuccessful visit? And also what their experience of the actual physical space was at this time. And, you know, people had lots of positives and lots of negatives. And we learnt some sort of quite pragmatic things, like all the years I've been to the library, I didn't even know this was here. And things like, why do the books take up all the good space by the window? So some of those kind of low-level ones, but also broader things about how people wanted the library to be a hangout space, but not a hangout space like the mall. It needed to be a hangout space that had focus, that provided inspiration. It was a place where you would get expertise. So understanding these nuances of how the community wanted the library to operate. We also, again, did things like scenarios. What would the ideal experience look like and feel like? And how important are some of these concepts to the community in terms of the role that the library should play and the services that it should offer? And so while we got some quite pragmatic, you know, space things and signage things, there was also a better understanding of what it meant to be Hurstville Library, what the library itself could offer given the context it was in. And Hurstville is an incredibly densely populated, multicultural, very fast-growing urban centre in Sydney. And so people, you know, express that by saying, you know, it's a creative cultural hub as a natural extension for the library. We should see that when we get to the library because that's what we experience and that's what we enjoy about Hurstville. But this signage and the collection needs to reflect that as well. The library plays a really important role as a kind of sanctuary point because it is chaotic in Hurstville. There's not a lot of kind of quiet space, and so the library needed to be technically savvy and sophisticated, but not overloaded and overpowering. It still had to retain that kind of quietness. And one of the key things that the library had never considered that was really important, and you know, it was an opportunity that was opened up for them through this process, was to realise that they had green space that they could offer, and their community really wanted them to utilise that because there is very little green space in Hurstville. So it was a way that they could rethink about their role as being able to offer that to the community. That was one of the things that they could do, and ultimately that will increase their impact because more people will come, more people will use it, and it has greater relevance, or whatever the word is that you're allowed to use instead of relevance. And so you know, they've changed their architectural plans on the basis of this feedback now that they understand how important those aspects of the library are for the community. The next example is the Uts Library, and many of you will have already seen things from Mal Booth and his colleagues at UTS, and they've been on a journey for quite a number of years in terms of discovering what their future of the library will be. And they're moving, so that's a catalyst for them. They're going to put 80% of their collection underground, so there's a lot of questions that get raised about what do we do with that space, and how do we provide discovery services when you're not actually having the books on the floor. And they've done a lot of different things with current students and staff to understand their experiences and their needs of the library. Some formal sort of research, but also this is an informal example of the wall wisher, which started out just as a thing you could write notes on and stick on the wall. And it was so successful, they've evolved it into a set of screens, and you can just go on and type your suggestions straight in, and it pops up on the wall. So it's kind of playful. And so it's just this ongoing engagement that they have with their students. They've also gone out and talked to future students. So this is a workshop with year 10s and understanding, what do you think about libraries and learning, and what will your expectations be when you get to university? Because if you're planning the future of the library for 2020, you're not planning to deliver services to any of your current students, so you need to be thinking further forward than that. And they do a lot of work internally as well. So this is planning day at UTS, staff planning day, where everybody's prototyping what ideas that they have for future services. And they were doing this before they had ever heard of design, but it naturally came to them to start building and expressing and exploring in that way. Once they realised the scale of the design decisions that they have to make around designing new models of service, designing a new organisation, and designing new spaces. And they sort of recognised the value that maybe design tools could bring. So for them, it was a natural extension of the way they already wanted to work with each other. Through this process, they've got an understanding of what students expect the library should do, and looking at it from the students' world. And they've also rethought some fundamental things like, what does information literacy mean when you're 20 now? And it means that I want to be able to access it through Facebook or Twitter. It means Google. It doesn't just mean library resources. And so they've restructured their information literacy programs to include supporting, how to use Google and how to use Prezi and things like that. So they've been more expansive about how they think about some of those traditional services. This is a quote from Jemima MacDonald, which I thought was a really nice kind of summary of some of their experiences. We needed to stop expecting students to do it our way. Whenever possible, we needed to consider changing our thinking rather than the other way around. This is quite a big shift. So you might have spent a lot of energy trying to teach people about information literacy and then suddenly realise that we needed to flip it completely. I know a lot of you will already, these are kind of journeys you're already on or you've been on already. What it also allowed them to do was build a future vision of what the role of their library was. So they've been improving and changing things as they go, but they've also started to build this collective thing about what is the centre of their organisation, what is their role and their purpose, and to be able to articulate that very clearly. So they're all about connecting people, providing access to knowledge and collaboration and connection. And so once they were sort of clear, there's more details than that obviously, but once they were clear about their role and the central role they wanted to play in the university, they can start thinking more strategically about how to deliver on that. And they can also communicate it to other people more clearly as well. So they've been sort of working at multiple levels, but they've been doing it for a long time. And their biggest thing is just to continue co-design processes with their staff and students as much as they can. So this is a more recent internal planning day where they were looking for sustainability options. Importantly, they had no idea where they were going when they started. They didn't know where they were going to get to, and they've only sort of just recently been able to start to articulate some of that bigger picture stuff. So it's been very much an ongoing journey for them. So the next one is AUT Library, and I know there's some people here from AUT Library, so they'll be able to correct me or add to the story. AUT are also looking at a sort of future of the library program. And they're not shifting, but they're wanting to think, how will we have to be reconfiguring our resources, responding to lots of the changes that are going on in libraries, and understand how we'll be supporting our community. And they're already doing great stuff, like a user-centered design program of their websites, but they're also doing an internal change program to build the capacity of library staff to understand what it means to involve students and to involve their community in future planning processes and the design of future services. So this is from an internal planning day again, where they're building personas, which is a simple design tool that just starts us thinking, who are the people that we serve, who is our community? And they're not a substitute for research, but they're just a playful thing that everybody can start doing together. They become a collective activity where we're all starting to visualise and just kickstart that conversation. They also did a series of co-design workshops for all staff, so all 60 staff attended these, and they were, again, to create a platform for everybody at AUT, all staff at AUT, to understand the potential for what it might mean to involve users and involve staff in planning future services. And so they played with some of these design tools. This is if you recognise Lorraine Shepherd's chin, she's the university librarian from AUT. And this is a user journey map where you sort of map out the experience of someone using some kind of library service. You see the highs and lows of what's happening when they're doing that, and then the reasons behind those highs and lows. So that's just a classic sort of design tool that we use to start thinking about what people's experiences are and breaking them down and understanding pain points. So all the staff played with those sorts of tools and thought about, just started thinking, what would it mean for us to become co-designers ourselves and start to do this with our community. So the workshops are only 2 hours, they just scratch the surface, but there are platforms for ongoing thinking. And these are just a couple of reflections from AUT staff about the process that they've been on. So most of us would say we are user-centred and always have been, but that has often been from the point of view of what we think the users want, rather than seeing the users as active participants in the planning process. So we may have always been empathetic, but that doesn't necessarily translate into having had the tools or the strategies to then involve people in different ways. So they're using this as a sort of platform for thinking about how they do their future work. So it's early days, but this approach has changed the way we approach all our projects. So one of their fundamental shifts has been to say there must be input and consultation at the beginning of all changes that we do, not at the end, so we don't implement it and then test it and see whether it worked or not. We move all that involvement to the beginning of the process. So we've looked at what some of the qualities of design are and how people are applying it and how it's been moved through a few different library organisations. What I want to do is just share from some of those libraries and some others the experience of going on this design journey. So what that has meant for them, what to expect. If you want to contribute to this on Twitter yourselves and add in your own tips for going on the design journey, then please feel free and use this hashtag. So all of the examples, okay, there's some slides that have slipped around. So all of the examples that they were showing how going from the community perspective and intersecting with the library would help understand in new ways and open up new possibilities. What they also got to do was think about what was going on in the middle. So I'm jumping around, there were some weird things with that slide. I'll just go back for a second and summarise our case studies. They looked at those overlaps, but then they asked those questions. Not only how can we improve our outside services, but also who are we actually, our particular library. So not just what's the future of the library, but what's the future of being Hurstville Library? What's the future of being AUT Library? What's the future of being UTS Library? What does it mean specifically for us and for our particular community? Where do we want to focus our resources depending on who we are and what we have to offer? So those were the kind of key outcomes for those libraries in terms of identifying their own strengths, not just having to respond to all the global changes that are happening, but understand locally what does that mean for them. So now we can get on to the design journey, sorry. First of all, it's not an overnight thing, and that's completely fine. So it does take time. If you've been having a go at this and it's felt slow, that's okay. It does take a while for new habits to form. It is a shift in how we work. It does tend to mean the introduction of more experimental, more playful, more collaborative practices, which doesn't sound so bad, but it is quite a different way from traditional planning and kind of strategic planning models to introduce these kinds of qualities. You may well be doing these sorts of things in other parts of your work, and so you can look to grow that out. Maybe you're already doing it with your community, or even maybe in the kids section of the library. How can you actually expand those out to other parts of how you're working? And some of the libraries have embedded these kind of principles into the way that they work to make sure that they fundamentally underpin how they think about what they do. So some examples would be from AUT, their Library of the Future principle includes learning by doing, like action research. Auckland Libraries, who's also recently gone through a sort of transformation and they've developed their own strategic plan, one of their underpinning principles is experiment, innovate and learn. For UTS, this is my favourite. Learning how not to start with knowing. So letting go of that need to kind of have thought everything through or understand exactly what's going to happen at the beginning and just starting and working through it that way. Also, principles around collaboration and play. So collaborating and partnering for success is a fundamental part of the Auckland Library's strategy. and for UTS, being collaboratively creative, revealing more comprehensive solutions through empathy and play. So these are now fundamental parts of how these libraries want to operate. And again, they're probably qualities that come very naturally to a lot of people already. So here's permission to kind of, push them to all different sectors of your organisation. Embedding users actively takes planning. So you do need to rethink how some of the projects get rolled out. And instead of maybe seeing a problem and immediately going, oh, I know how to fix that, step back and think, actually, is that just a symptom of something? Can I unpack that problem a bit more and find out if there's a different way of thinking about it? So it means involving users all the way through, not just at the end when we want to test usability or measure satisfaction. You will need a champion. Like I said, it's new habits. Someone has to keep reminding you all the time what you're trying to do. But everybody can and should be involved. So some departments, maybe not in New Zealand, but in the US, some libraries have user experience departments. And those people are doing a lot of that work, and that's fantastic. But the great thing about design tools are that they are accessible for everybody. That's the point of some of those activities. So everybody can play a role in thinking in that way, but also in involving the community to explore different opportunities. Do expect the unexpected. There is a design process, and it does have a form of structure. But because people are involved in that process, it gets messy and it's a bit organic, right? So it definitely doesn't look like those two clean diamonds that I showed you at the beginning. And part of it is being able to be responsive to the opportunities that come up and the outcomes of collaboration. So you need to learn when it's like maybe the process says go to step 5 and you're like, that doesn't feel right, and that's because you'll need to be thinking about something else. So kind of trust that things will evolve and things will change. And it'll be different for every library. There'll be some things that you can share and they'll be similar, but there'll be other things that have come out in quite different ways, and that's completely fine too. And part of the value of design is it's about the context. It's about the particular context. So you want to understand what's important about where you are. Give yourself permission to redefine yourself. And I know people are doing this all the time, but it is worth calling out, and this is what people did when I asked them to share your thoughts for the LIANZA audience. Sometimes you will be letting go of things that you've done for a long time and you've invested a lot of effort in. And then when you've started to look at it in different ways or things have evolved and you'll be developing new services, that will mean, Mel uses a phrase, which is, I think, creative decommissioning, which he got from somewhere. And you need to be letting things go because we can't resource everything. But the point of this process is that it provides us with a bit of a strategic view of where we're getting the most value. So we know we're letting that go, but we're gaining this from going in this other direction. Be brave. It is challenging, it is energizing. I know I sort of laughed when I wrote this slide because I'm speaking to a group of people who take on governments and publishers and free trade agreements and stuff. So bravery is not a problem for librarians, even if that's not necessarily a trait that you would naturally think. So I know that you guys won't have any lack of bravery in terms of trying out new things. So those were some thoughts about going on the design journey from some of the organisations that I've worked with. And like I said, please do feel free to add to that if you've got your own experiences that you want to share. How are we doing for time? So this last little bit is just some start points. If you're sort of going, yes, that sounds interesting, but I don't know where to start, or hopefully, yes, I'm already doing it and I'm going to share it with heaps of people over the next couple of days. Here are just some thoughts of some start points. So begin building a shared picture of your community and their world. And you can do that in any way you like. You could just start drawing it. But literally mapping out, who is it that you serve, and what's going on in their world, and sharing that inside your organisation. So a lot of you might already have a lot of that in your head. You already know a lot about who you're working with, but have you got that out somewhere available so that other people can be referencing it, and you can be using that as a way to direct discussions about why you should or shouldn't be doing things. And maybe start asking some of those questions if you're not already. Who is our community? What is the intersection between their lives and our organisation? Under what circumstances do they need us or come to us? Or when should they be coming to us but they're not, and why? And how do they perceive and experience us? There's lots of different ways that you can start to get that information and understand who you're, more deeply what's going on. You can use formal forms of engagement, so like proper, research methods, like say the Hurstville program was a particular research program. And the Wallara Library has like a website going for the Double Bay Library where they're eliciting lots of feedback from their community. So you can, if you've got the resources, that's fantastic. But you can also be looking for much more opportunistic engagements. And so, for example, the wall wisher, the students are already there, so it's an opportunity to get feedback from them. Or Swinburne Library did the people that, are they shelvers, as they're putting books back on the shelves, and they would see people who were sort of a bit lost, and they would stop and interview them basically. They'd help them find the book they were looking for, but also find out what was the process that you went through to look for this book. So they would record things like, people were looking for a book in the 800s, so they were on the 8th floor, that sort of thing. So they were getting the understanding of what was the experience that people were actually having. Or, they read up to 374, and then they were just wandering around hoping that it would leap out at them, even though it was 374.867527 or something like that. So they were just getting this understanding of what people were doing, and they were just opportunistic. They were already there anyway, so they were sort of turning those engagements into data collection points. And this was something that was we talked about a lot with AUT. You've already got liaison librarians. You've already got a lot of contact points. A lot of you are having really close relationships with the people with your community, and you know a lot of things about them. But how can we turn that knowledge into something we can then use for design? Think about what sort of levels the questions are that you're asking inside your organisation. Do you need to be across all three of these? Are you already asking how can we improve our services? But maybe you could be asking, should we be doing it differently? Like what level are you operating? Are you very clear about what's going on at the top? Because then that'll help you know where to focus the second two things. Identify what's unique to you and your community. So I've said this a couple of times, but this is one of the most important things around design, and it's particularly true as resources contract a bit, and you need to be really clear about who you serve and what your context is. But that's where the opportunities are as well, to understand exactly what's particular about your library and your community and your geography, or the needs of your community. And that'll help you know who you need to be involving and maybe the direction that you want to take some things. Learn through involvement and through mentors. So just get in, but also it does help to have some kind of coach. You don't need to go hire a design agency necessarily, because it's a pretty expensive thing to do. Some organisations can afford to do that. But it would be good if you could get people who've gone on this journey before or who have some experience in this journey to come in and give a bit of coaching or support or help you set up a framework. The design community is particularly open and generous, so there's often meetups and there's LinkedIn groups and there's a lot of free resources out there, but you will need some sort of navigation for how to apply those. At the same time, start somewhere, start anywhere. It really doesn't matter where you start, and you won't know whether it was the right place until after you've done it anyway, so you just need to give it a go. And this was a sentiment again from someone from AUT. Even if you adopt these approaches only to a limited extent, they will expand your knowledge of your users and their experience of your service. So even if you only have a tiny little go, you should still get some benefits out of it. And that's the same for the other aspects I talked about as well. The making tangible, the playing, the visualising. They start to reap their own benefits because you're putting things out and you're starting to create spaces for collaboration. So to come full circle, what I hope I've sort of shared some ideas around this morning is that design is a way to work with our community to create the future that we want and to have the greatest impact. You can do it on a range of levels. You can be improving your services with your community, you can be rethinking your services, and you can be thinking about the evolution of your organisation and the role and contribution it plays. You can build your design capacity in a number of ways, and you can start tomorrow. Thank you. All right, I'm on.
Well, didn't I say it was going to be riveting? It's given us a whole new way of looking at how we approach our planning processes. I particularly liked Queensland's little quote around learning how not to start with knowing, which I think is a pitfall that many of us are prone to. We've actually got about 10 minutes worth of questions now, So can I ask you to have a think about anything you'd like to ask Penny, and here's your opportunity. As I say, she's not going to be around for the rest of the conference, so seize the moment now. There should be microphones circulating. Yes, there is. Okay.
Everyone's hungry.
Yeah, I know, it's close to lunchtime. We've got someone over here, Philip from Winteg.
Over there?
Yes.
Penny, you mentioned that a lot of what you've done with designing was just sort of playful interaction, collaboration, but you also mentioned that there was some research that was done around with the libraries that you work with. I was wondering, do you have any links to that research?
Like the different case studies and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I'll put up, it's not in the back of these slides because there's not much point, but I have a collection of, I don't know how exhaustive it is, of different case studies of different libraries that are engaging in this sort of way with their community. So I can absolutely share that. So I'll aggregate that and share that link, definitely. That's what you mean, right? Like
yes,
different examples?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. It won't be APA reference style though. Good.
Well, I'm from an academic library, and one thing that we often hear is that students are really tired they feel over-surveyed. So that's sort of a thing that's often, I think we're worried about, asking students because we feel we might just annoy them. Obviously, a more design process being playful and experiential would hopefully be a bit more fun and less wearying. But do you think that is a problem to be, or a thing to worry about?
I mean, I think you absolutely have to be respectful of people's time. I have two parallel thoughts about that. I think the methods make a difference. So often if it's playful, people start to get things out of it that they didn't know about. So I definitely wouldn't be promoting more surveys, probably. Having said that, I think you can get away with a lot with spontaneous questions. So there was another library whose name I forget. One of their techniques was literally there was groups working in the library, and they would just go up and do spontaneous interviews and say, "Can I have 4 minutes of your time?" And largely they got very positive responses. And you can kind of read whether people are comfortable or not. Incentives is actually a really strong part of it as well. So all the work that we would do for Inspire Foundation, for example, the young people really enjoy that, but we're still giving them an incentive for that because that's about saying, we respect your contribution and your time. It's not that we're expecting you to do these things for free. That doesn't necessarily have to be money, but there might be other ways that you can, you're still saying it's a courtesy for you to share the stuff with us. Some of the things that we've done, that they do at UTS and we've done at AUT, is around collaborations with projects. And I mean, that's got its own bunch of stuff as well. But if students are already doing projects on design or actually any number of things, visualization, and they can collaborate with the library, there is a need to think about how you present that opportunity. And sometimes that opportunity needs to be presented in a way that's interesting to students, not necessarily interesting to the library. And that's part of our work that you have to do when you want to collaborate, in that way, is think, how can we make this so that for students they're getting something out of it? Because it can't just be what we get out of it. So you do have to be a bit creative about how you want to make that engagement. So you might be asking them to participate in ways that are less direct, but you'll still get a richness out of it. So I think it's totally, you can work around it, but you do absolutely have to be aware of the fact that just constantly maybe asking questions doesn't get anywhere in terms of the richness of the engagement that you're trying to do. Yeah. I think too, if I can add one more thing, I know that in some situations, libraries, academic libraries, maybe students are kind of like, library? Like they have a particular set of expectations and things that they think about the library that maybe makes activities around the library less exciting. UTS is a really great example of how they've done a lot of different things to become more engaging. So they have artists in residence that come from the graphic design program. They have a lot of fun days and collaboration sessions that has kind of opened the library out. So it is part of almost like a rebranding exercise for them to a certain extent as well, if that makes sense, yeah.
Thanks for that, Penny. I thought that was really interesting, and you've given me lots of good ideas. I'm Brenda Chawner from the School of Information Management of Victoria. And my question is, I guess it's about whether it would be, is asking people these kinds of questions, does it work better when you've got a group of people who can bounce ideas off each other? Because often when you ask somebody, an individual, what would your ideal X be, they're bounded by what they can see. And the second half of my question is, if you are forced to talk with individuals rather than groups, would you, for example, provide them with summaries of this is what we've learned so far?
Oh, could you say that last bit, just that last bit again?
Yeah, so if you end up, basically, you can't get groups together. You have to talk to people individually. Would you perhaps give them a bit of a, here are some of the ideas that we've gotten so far to get some reaction?
Yeah, so I think there is a skill to almost like the start points that you provide people with in terms of triggering their ability to think in different ways. And so that's part of the role of those visual tools. So for the first part of the question, the collaboration is really important because it's less about asking people what would your ideal situation be, and it's more about what happens after they've built that picture and they start talking about it and they start saying, oh, well, I put that there because of these things, and things start to kind of emerge out of that discussion rather than necessarily directly through the artifact or the scenario that they've created. So that collaboration is really important. Seeding that with particular propositions or ideas is also part of helping stimulate the discussion. When you do it individually, like we've done a lot of activities where we can't get groups in together because maybe they're in rural parts of Australia or something. And so we will send out packs for people. So they're still doing those kind of visual activities and mapping and thinking, which allows them to think in different ways, but they're doing it on their own. And that's equally, it's a different kind of useful, but it's equally useful. Even things like writing a letter, so asking people to write a love letter to something, is that like that giving people metaphors to play with can open up discussions in really different ways. Yeah. Thank you.
Right, one final question.
If you've been through, say, a reasonably large-scale design process and perhaps the end result just hasn't quite hit the mark, where do you go from there?
That's a good question. It's a little hard to know with that context, I guess, but I mean, the first thing is trying to understand, I suppose, what the learnings are from that process. And there isn't an end point, usually, with a lot of these things. You're continuing to evolve. If you have gone through a process where you've made a significant investment and you're not seeing the returns on that, and you're thinking, what's the problem? I mean, sometimes it's actually about how did you decide to measure it in the first place? And did you spend some time thinking about how you would know what success would look like? Because that can change the course of what you're doing. I'm trying to come up with something even much more inspirational for you, but that's about all I can think. But it's more like if you're thinking, what have we done, and how can we unpack that and then continue to build on it? Because I do think it's never the end point. So you're always in a position where you know more than you did before. It's unfortunate if you've spent a large portion of your budget, but is there a way that you can start evolving the things that are working and understanding what's not working and moving back around to another point of iteration? I don't know if is that in any way helpful? We could talk more about it at the break.
Okay, right, well that brings the session to an end. On behalf of LIANZA 2013, I would like to thank Dr.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Much.